I was hanging out with a bunch of my friends over Thanksgiving break. We all go to different colleges, so this was one of the few times that we were able to get together. The group consisted of the usual suspects, which included Adam, Zach, Jupe, Luke, Brendan, Mario, and myself. We always end up at Mario's house and tend to keep to the basement because of its size and seclusion from any unwanted attention. Mario's house is giant and his basement is no exception to the luxuriousness of the rest of his house. Apart from being very spacious, the basement is also nicely furnished, carpeted, and comfortable to stay in. Basically, think rich man's basement. During most of our get-togethers, there was a fair amount of drinking, and after a while of being cooped up in the basement, my friends and I start to get rowdy and want to drive out to the local strip club. I'm not much of a drinker, so I usually stay sober during these events. Thus, I'm usually left as the designated driver for everyone else. Normally, I'm alright with driving everyone to the strip club, but during this specific night, I was really against going out. There were several reasons for this. 1. I would have to drive 6 drunkenly annoying people in my truck the day before Thanksgiving, which has the reputation of being the day with the most drunk drivers. I didn't want any of my friends to get an underage drinking violation, even though several of them already have one. And on top of that, I would also get in trouble if the police happened to find alcohol in my bloodstream while driving, which they definitely would have. The second reason why I didn't want to go out to the strip club was because there was a high possibility that one or several of my friends would end up in a fight. They tend to provoke people when they're drunk. This again leads to the police and underage drinking and all that damaging stuff. I really wanted to stay at Mario's and just hang out around in the basement for the rest of the night, but they were adamant about going and it was 6 against 1, so I finally caved in. We all started getting ready. As the time came closer to leaving, my friends became more and more rambunctious. I had to go upstairs in order to retrieve my car keys, so I left my loud friends roughhousing in the basement while I searched. I found my keys resting on a table in Mario's kitchen, but while I was walking over to get them, the lights went out. I stood still, wondering what the hell just happened, but a few seconds later, the lights came back on. I didn't really think much about it and went over to grab my keys off the table when I noticed something else and stopped moving. I couldn't hear the muffled noises that my friends were making below me anymore. I just shrugged it off, trying to assume that they started to calm down, which was a good sign, and I went back downstairs. I reached the basement, but was surprised to find that my friends weren't there. The back door to the house is located in the basement, so I assumed that they left through that and were headed to the cars that were parked in the driveway. I quickly followed them through the back door and started heading towards the driveway myself. I got to where the cars were parked, but once again, my friends were nowhere to be found. Everyone drove up to Mario's house separately, and I got scared for a second, thinking that they all piled into someone else's vehicle and took off intoxicated toward the strip club. But I counted the cars and saw that all of them were still there. It was the middle of November, so it was cold as shit outside, and I wanted to go back in, but I still decided to take a quick lap around the exterior of the house just in case they were out there smoking or something. I walked around the entire house but didn't see or hear anything, so I went back inside through the back door. They still weren't in the basement, but they could have gone upstairs without me knowing. Since the basement is so big, there are 2 stairwells on either side of the room that are separated by a wall. I deduced that while I was coming down one of the stairwells, my friends had gone up the other one, probably in search for me. I went up to the first floor again, and looked around for my friends, but once again, I couldn't find anyone. There was no way that they went up to the second floor because that was where Mario's dad was sleeping. Intoxicated or not, Mario would not have let them on the second floor because the last thing he would want to do is wake up his sleeping dad while drunk. I went up anyway and quietly searched for my friends, trying to make as little noise as possible. I couldn't find them on the second floor either. The only place left inside the house was the attic, but it was actually impossible for them to get in there. They needed a chair just to reach the handle on the ceiling, and it was also locked from the outside. At this point, I was annoyed just as much as I was confused. Where the hell did they go? I went back to the basement and called Mario on my phone. It started to ring, but all I could hear was the buzz of it on the coffee table next to me. Damn, Mario had left his phone. I tried calling Zach. It went straight to his voicemail. I tried Luke, same thing. Then Adam and Jupe and Brandon. Every single one went straight to a voicemail. I didn't know what to do at that point besides wait. Wait for what? I don't know. I just sat there on the couch alone in the basement. I wasn't moving at all. I was just listening to nothing. It was eerily quiet in the basement all by myself, and I don't want to come off as a cliche by saying that it was almost too quiet, but it was. It's hard to describe the stillness that I was feeling. The best way I could put it is that I could literally hear the silence around me. I was starting to creep myself out and wanted to turn on the TV. I was about to stand up and get the remote when I heard something. It was very soft, but I knew I heard it. I stood still and let the silence consume me once again. After a few seconds, I heard the same thing again. It was still soft, but I could tell where it was. It was sniggering. The kind of sniggering that you make whenever you try to suppress a laugh by putting a hand over your mouth. That's when it hit me. My friends were hiding somewhere, laughing at me, and they obviously didn't want to be found, which is why they were trying to hold back their laughter. Once I figured out what the noise was, I became very annoyed that my friends were intentionally hiding from me, even though I was getting genuinely worried about where they were. I got up and started looking for them again, thoroughly checking all the closets in the basement, and there were a lot of them. While I was looking, the sniggering started to become more distinguished, but I could not figure out where it was coming from. I was at the end of the room and could hear the sniggering behind me, but once I went over to the opposite end of the basement, I would hear it behind me again. Like I said before, the basement is a big area with a lot of closets and closed rooms, but there are only so many places that a person could hide, and I felt that I checked all of them. Yet, the damn sniggering was still going on, and it was very noticeable at this point. Then, all at once, it stopped. It cut off out of nowhere. There was no way that my friends could have choreographed a stunt like this, especially while they were drunk. Something was wrong. Something felt off, and it was at this exact moment that I started to become scared. I was standing in the middle of the basement, not moving, and once again in complete and utter silence. That's when the lights turned off. I felt like I was in the beginning of a nightmare, and I wanted to wake up more than anything. Instead, I just stood there in the dark, too petrified to move. That's when I started to hear footsteps. The floor was carpeted, so they were quiet, but I could hear them as clear as day. They were coming from my right, but they were not the type of footsteps that you would have expected. These steps were very particular. They were taken slowly, carefully. Each step was followed by a few seconds of silence, as if whatever was walking did not want to be heard. Something was creeping closer to me. I dared not to move my body, but I searched frantically with my eyes to try and see what was approaching. It was still pitch black, but I could swear that I could make out a figure advancing toward me from my right. I closed my eyes and started to cry. I couldn't help it. Warm tears slid down my cheeks as I braced myself for the worst. Then, the lights came on. I almost screamed. I looked around, but there was no one in the basement with me. The sniggering was gone, and I felt the light headed from the amount of terror that was flowing through me. I was horrified, and I didn't want to be in the room by myself any longer. I still had no idea where my friends were, and as much as I wanted to leave, I didn't want to leave them behind. If this was some kind of elaborate prank that my friends were trying to scare me with, it worked, but the joking was over, and they would have come out of hiding by now. I texted each of my friends saying that I was going to leave if they didn't come out. I tried calling each of them 3 times, but just like before, it all went to voicemail, except for Mario's, which was still buzzing on the coffee table where he left it. I told myself that I would give them 5 more minutes to respond, and then I was out of there. 5 minutes later, I was leaving through the back door and was headed towards my truck. It was almost 2 o'clock in the morning at this point, I was tired, scared, and annoyed, and I honestly didn't know what to make of the situation. Once I got home, I started to realize how stupid I was for thinking that there was some monster in the basement with me when the lights went off. I knew that my friends were just trying to scare me for whatever reason, but I'm sure that I gave them the exact reaction that they were looking for, me crying by myself in the corner. They probably had it on video too, and were going to post it on every single social media platform they could. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I no longer felt bad for leaving them behind. As a matter of fact, I felt betrayed by them. I spent over an hour worrying about where my friends had disappeared to, and I tried looking for them. And in return, they scared the living shit out of me and made me feel like an idiot. Fuck them. I went to bed and waited anxiously for morning to come so I could give my friends hell for what they did. When I woke up the next morning, I immediately went for my phone and was shocked to find that Mario had sent me a text around 3:30 a.m. last night. I opened the text only to find that nothing but gibberish. It clearly looked like a drunk text. I wasn't surprised by this, but Mario had sent me many drunk texts in the past, all of which were similarly unreadable. It was almost 11 a.m., and if the guys had stayed up all night drinking, there was no way any of them were awake yet. I decided to wait it out and make them call me first, and it wasn't too long after I woke up that I received another text. This time, though, it was from Mario's dad. He said, "Did you guys go somewhere? I can't seem to find anybody." I replied with, "I actually left last night. I don't know if they went somewhere, but I couldn't find them last night either." He replied, "Have you tried calling or texting any of them? I keep getting their voicemail." "Yeah, I'm getting the same thing too." "Okay, well, if Mario or anybody else calls you, tell them to call me so I know where they are." "Will do." About 2 hours later, Mario's dad texts me again. "Hey, have you heard anything from your friends yet? Mario and I were supposed to go somewhere today, but he still isn't answering his phone." "No, sorry. I haven't heard anything yet." I didn't want to tell him about the drunken text because Mario's dad hates whenever Mario and his friends come over to drink. Around 4 p.m., Mario's dad texts me once again. "Have you heard anything yet? I'm starting to get worried. All the other parents are starting to call me asking where everybody is. I've called Mario and everyone else over and over again, but none of them are answering." "I still haven't heard anything, but I'll try to call them myself. Don't worry, I'm sure they're fine. They probably stayed up all night over at someone's house and are sleeping in all day." "Okay, just please tell me if you get anything." "I will." I started texting and calling my friends again, but I still wasn't getting anything. Another 3 hours go by. It's a little past 7 a.m. at this point. I was starting to get worried, but I didn't realize how serious the situation was until I got a knock on the door. It was the police. They informed me that Mario's dad and several of my other friends' parents reported their sons missing. I was driven back to Mario's house and was greeted by several other police officers as well as all of my friends' worried parents. The parents kept asking me questions about what we were doing last night and where their children had gone, but I didn't know. I just kept reassuring them that everybody was alright, but after a while, even I was starting to doubt myself. 2 police officers, one skinny, the other fat, escorted me into the basement. They kept asking me questions, and I answered as best as I could, but I was starting to become delirious from everything that was happening. I told them the whole story starting from when I went upstairs to retrieve my car keys. I told them about the sniggering and how the lights went out. I told them about the figure that I thought I saw creeping towards me in the dark. At this point, I didn't care how crazy I sounded. I just wanted my friends to be okay. I told them about the drunken text I received last night, and when I showed them the message, the fat cop took my phone and walked away with it. I was left with the skinny police officer who continued to ask me more questions. After he was done, I asked him if Mario's dad had found a phone on the coffee table whenever he came down to look for everybody. The officer told me that Mario's dad found no such thing. I informed the skinny police officer that I distinctly remember seeing Mario's phone on the coffee table before I left and had assumed that he retrieved it later that night, which would explain the drunken text that I received last night. He wrote down a couple more notes and left, telling me to stay where I was. I was back in the basement, standing almost exactly where I was when the lights went out. The scene now, compared to last night, was completely different. There were detectives everywhere looking over everything, dusting for fingerprints, asking questions. I closed my eyes and started to cry. I couldn't help it. Warm tears slid down my cheeks, but I was sucked back into reality when the fat officer yelled for me to come over to him. He was standing next to some geeky looking guy wearing glasses, and once I got over to them, the fat man asked me if I was playing some kind of sick joke. Stunned, I asked what he was talking about. The geeky guy wearing glasses was the first to answer. He introduced himself as a linguist and informed me that the text Mario had sent me last night was not gibberish. It was Latin and translated to, "Your friends are with me now." Growing up, my father always told me I was a follower, not a leader. On an almost daily basis, he would say to me, "Boy, you've got to forge your own path in life, instead of fooling around with those knuckleheads you call friends." He was, of course, correct, but when I was a teenager, that kind of wisdom went in one ear and out the other. In my mind, I was invincible. I knew everything and I could get away with anything. I was wrong. My friends and I fucked with the wrong person. I spent 2 years in a psychiatric facility, and I'm a shell of the person I was before. In high school, I fell in with the wrong group of friends. We were a merry band of burnouts, jocks, and assholes. We all played junior varsity football for our freshman and sophomore years of high school. We clowned around during school, smoked weed before practice, and never saw the field during games. It was no surprise to anyone we didn't make the varsity team our junior year of school. We suddenly found ourselves with too much free time on our hands now that we didn't have to attend football practice for 3 hours each day. We took to hanging around town after school, smoking and sometimes drinking when we could find someone to buy us booze. Tyler, who was definitely the ringleader of our little group, eventually got us into petty theft. He was your typical spoiled rich kid. His parents were always working, never home, so they bought his affection with gifts, gave him whatever he wanted, so, of course, he grows up to become an asshole. This kid, for whatever reason, loved to steal. It was definitely for the thrill of it, since he had daddy's Amex in his wallet and could buy whatever he wanted. On a typical afternoon, we'd go out of school around 2:30 and drive around town smoking and sometimes boozing. We always rode with Tyler in his brand new SUV. I had a shitty Honda Civic that I had bought after a summer of working, while our other two friends, Chris and Ahmed, couldn't afford cars. Tyler would choose a store and give us a laundry list of items to steal. Ahmed would usually be tasked with distracting the clerks while the rest of us made off with whatever we could get our hands on. We'd then sell whatever we got on eBay and split the profit. I could tell that Tyler was getting bored with the petty theft by the time senior year rolled around. He invited us over one weekend, and I could tell he had something planned by the idiotic grin on his face. We smoked weed, ripped shots of tequila, and played video games until around midnight. Tyler said he was bored and decided that we needed to go for a joyride around town. However, once we were in the car, Tyler drove us farther out into the suburbs away from town. He refused to tell us where we were going until we stopped outside a large house. He turned to us, motioning towards the dark house, and said, "Yo, this guy is loaded. My dad told me this guy came into his office the other day and insured $500,000 worth of rare coins." Chris pumped a fist in the air and drunkenly slurred, "Hell yeah, man, screw that guy, let's get paid." Tyler extended his fist to Chris for a pound and said, "That's my boy right here," and then turned to Ahmed and me and said, "What about you two?" Ahmed looked at me and then down at the floor. I don't know, man. Stealing shit from a store is one thing, but breaking into some guy's house is goddamn serious. Tyler's face reddened, and I could tell that he was about to tear into Ahmed. Me, being a spineless shit that hated confrontation, jumped in and said to Ahmed, "Dude, you could buy a sick car for yourself if we get those coins." Tyler regained his composure and said icily, "Y'all need to man up. This guy isn't even home. He's in fucking Europe or some shit right now. Have some faith in me. Have I ever got you guys caught?" Ahmed reluctantly agreed to join in, and we passed around the handle of tequila until we had finished it. Tyler pulled out a black bag and passed out black masks and gloves. "Fucking legit," slurred Chris as he pulled on his mask. Tyler smiled and pulled on his own mask. He said, "Okay, here's the plan. We go around the back and check the windows. If they're locked, then we break the glass and let ourselves in. I looked up this guy's insurance application in my dad's office. He has no security system, so we have nothing to worry about." We exited the SUV and crept around towards the back of the house. The windows were all locked, so Tyler picked up a rock and smashed a hole in the nearest window. We boosted Chris in first, and Tyler told him to scope the place out. "Looks empty," Chris drunkenly yelled out. The three of us standing outside flinched, and Tyler muttered to himself, "Goddamn lightweight." When we were all inside the house, Tyler instructed us to split up and search the first floor. I was searching through a cabinet when I heard Tyler yell at Chris, "Put the speaker system down, we came here for the coins." After 10 minutes, we regrouped and decided to split up. Chris and Ahmed would search upstairs while Tyler and I checked out the basement. The basement door had a thick padlock on it, but Tyler laughed and said, "Why put a padlock on a cheap wooden door? What an idiot." He easily kicked in the door. There was no light switch near the door, so we descended the stairs using the glow from our phones to guide us. A small hallway at the bottom of the staircase led to another door. This door was made of steel. Tyler immediately started kicking the door. He gave up after the third kick and began ramming his shoulder against the door. He slumped to the floor, cursing, after his second attempt at smashing in the door. I was about to suggest to Tyler that we admit defeat and go back upstairs. Maybe we could find something else of value. I stepped forward to jiggle the door handle and found that the door was unlocked. Tyler shot me a dirty look from the floor and said, "Why the hell didn't you tell me it was unlocked?" He pushed past me and through the door. We found ourselves in a small room crowded with trophy cases and paintings on the wall. Tyler stepped closer to one of the trophy cases and found it full of rare coins on display. "Jackpot," he whispered. He opened up the case and began stuffing the coins into his bag. I began looking around the room, guided by the light of my phone, and became increasingly disturbed by what I saw. On the wall were paintings of torture from various time periods spanning the last 1,000 years. One painting showed a young boy being lowered headfirst into what looked like a boiling vat of oil. Another painting depicted a woman being burnt alive above a fire, skewered like a pig. Tyler?" I said, my heart pounding. "Shut up and make yourself useful," he snapped. "Check out the other trophy cases." I crept towards the nearest trophy case and aimed the light on my phone towards it. It was full of pictures, dozens of pictures of young men tied up. Some seemed more alive than others. They were missing limbs, tied down to tables, or hung up on the wall. I slowly turned towards Tyler and opened my mouth but found myself unable to speak. I stared at him stupidly, my head pounding and stomach knotted. Footsteps on the staircase freed me from my terrified trance. "Tyler, we need to get out of here right now," I croaked. He said, "What's the rush?" then called out towards the staircase. "Ahmed, Chris, took you clowns long enough. Hit gold down here, boys. Let's spark up a spliff to sell it." The overhead light snapped on, and Tyler and I were momentarily blinded. I started to curse when I heard quiet sobs. I opened my eyes and saw a large, overweight man standing behind Ahmed and Chris. Chris's face was covered in blood, and I saw that he no longer had eyes. Dark, empty sockets looked out upon the room. Tyler straightened up and screamed, "Who the fuck are you? Step back or I'll fuck you up." The fat man pushed Ahmed towards us, put his hand around Chris's shoulder and said,
"Chris, why don't you tell your young friend here what happens to boys who disrespect me?"
Chris opened his mouth and made a strange gargling sound. Blood dripped out of his mouth. Ahmed, tears running down his face, whispered to us, "He cut out Chris's tongue and eyes." The fat man, eyes glinting, laughed deeply and said,
"Ahmed is correct, but I think we can all agree that Chris is much better behaved now."
He patted Chris on the head, tousled his hair, and said,
"Which one of you can explain what nice young men like yourselves are doing in my home at this time of night?"
Tyler took a step towards the man, raising his fists, and said, "You have no idea who you're messing with." The fat man chuckled, causing his jowls to jiggle, and raised a pistol. Tyler paused for a moment, contemplating the gun in the man's hands. "No way. You can't touch me. My father's a powerful man." The fat man laughed again, put the gun to the back of Chris's head, and pulled the trigger. Brains and bits of skull showered Tyler.
"You boys can call me Mr. G, and you're going to do exactly what I say."
He nodded towards me and said,
"You, take the painting behind you and twist the knob."
I did as he instructed, and a secret door in the wall opened, revealing a large circular room behind it.
"Move along now,"
said the man cheerfully. The three of us slowly moved into the room with the fat man not far behind us. In the center stood a stainless steel surgical table. The periphery of the room was filled with a variety of torture devices that looked straight out of the Dark Ages. I recognized a torture rack, Judas cradle, an Iron Maiden, and a large vat sitting over a propane burner. On a wooden table, there appeared to be a wide variety of knives, hammers, scalpels, and saws. Mr. G put his left hand into his pocket and pulled out a black plastic comb. He combed back his dark, greasy hair while still pointing the gun at Tyler.
"Where do we go from here?"
He mused aloud as he placed the comb back into his pocket. He continued,
"Tyler, only one of you will be allowed to leave my house tonight. Who should it be?"
A dark spot began to grow on Tyler's crotch. The smell of urine filled the large room. Tyler pointed a trembling hand towards Ahmed and me and said with a quavering voice, "This was all their idea. They dragged me into this thing. I swear." Mr. G's brow furrowed as if he were seriously considering Tyler's words. He smiled at Tyler and said,
"I believe you, Tyler, but the only way you can leave is if you help me tie up your friends. There's some rope over on the wooden table."
A look of relief came upon Tyler's face, and he smiled at Ahmed and me. He shouted out, "Whatever you say, Mr. G," as he quickly scampered over to the table to retrieve the rope.
"Good. Now bring it back to me, boy."
He turned to Ahmed and me and winked. Tyler approached Mr. G, rope in hand, and said, "You know, Mr. G, I told these guys not to mess with a man such as yourself, but they just wouldn't listen."
Yes, I'm sure you did,"
said Mr. G as he pulled out a small taser and knocked Tyler unconscious. Mr. G grunted,
"You boys stay right where you are,"
as he bent over to tie up Tyler's hands and feet. He then dragged Tyler's limp body over towards the large vat and hoisted Tyler into it. He tied Tyler's hand to a hook hanging over the vat so that Tyler's head would not slip underwater. He then leaned down to light the propane burner under the vat and said,
"Let's get this soup cooking,"
more to himself than to Ahmed and me. Mr. G came back to Ahmed and I and said,
"Who's next?"
Ahmed and I looked at one another, but said nothing. Tyler had awoken on the other side of the room and began begging for Mr. G to let him go. Please, I'll do anything. Anything. Oh God, it's getting hot. It's burning. Mr. G ignored the pleas and hummed to himself while staring at Ahmed and me. Tyler's pleas became shriller until they turned to gibberish and eventually one continuous scream, which lasted for minutes. The screams eventually stopped and the smell of cooked flesh filled the room. Mr. G returned to the vat and turned off the propane burner. Without warning, Ahmed sprang to his feet and sprinted towards the door. Mr. G cursed and fumbled for his gun, aimed and fired off a shot which hit Ahmed in his calf. Ahmed crumpled into a ball on the floor. He only made it halfway to the door. Mr. G walked over to Ahmed, grabbed both of his arms, and dragged him towards the steel table in the center of the room. He looked at me and said,
"Lucky man, I'm going to put on a show for you."
They were 10 feet away from the table when I made my move. I used every last bit of energy I could muster as I sprinted towards the monster in the middle of the room. He had dropped Ahmed's arms and pulled out his gun. I could feel the bullets whizzing over my head, but the adrenaline surging through my body drowned out any and all sounds. My shoulders connected with the man's abdomen, and I pumped my legs, driving him backwards like we were taught during football. We gained momentum as his obese body began to topple backwards. I dug deep to pull up whatever strength I had left. His body slammed into the open Iron Maiden. I released him and immediately grabbed the door and struggled to push it shut. I heard a gasp from within the contraption as the spikes bit into his flesh, but he did not scream. Instead, he began to laugh, louder and harder, until the doors were finally shut and the spikes fully impaled his body. And then, there was silence. I turned and retrieved Ahmed, supporting his weight against my shoulder. Ahmed and I slowly made our way out of the basement and called the police. The police found a dozen more bodies in the freezer behind the torture room. I was a nervous wreck for years after this incident. Only the intensive therapy have I been able to obtain something resembling a normal life. The deaths of my friends were awful, of course, but the sound of Mr. G laughing during his final moments of life are what haunt me to this day. When I close my eyes to sleep at night, all I see are his eyes twinkling and jowls jiggling as he laughs at the terrible death closing in upon him.